Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for another edition of the IRENA Insights webinar series. My name is Karun Kocher, and I'm joining from IRENA's Innovation and Technology Center in Bonn, Germany. For those of us who are joining us for the first time, I would like to introduce IRENA and our webinar series. IRENA is an intergovernmental organization with 170 member countries and another 14 countries in their accession process. We support countries in the transition to a sustainable energy future and serve as the principal platform for international cooperation, a center of excellence, and a repository of policy, technology, resource, and financial knowledge on renewable energy. And because our analytical work and our engagement with our members generates a lot of valuable insights, we're constantly looking for more ways to share these insights with you. And that is why we launched this series. We have organized over 60 webinars on various topics, and you can check them all on our IRENA events page. The link to that will be in the presentation slides. We understand that there are many deep dive webinars out there, but our aim is to keep these webinars short and sweet, lasting approximately 30 minutes. While we cannot cover everything in this time frame, we do hope that they give you enough information, but more than that, the sources of enough information to help you explore the topic further. So today, in the next 30 minutes, we will hear from Ute Collier, Diala Vila, and Fabian Vigand, who will share insights from IRENA's latest reports, Green Hydrogen, a Guide to Design. But before I hand over the microphone to them, a few housekeeping items. The webinar will be recorded and posted on the IRENA events website. You are by default muted, but we would encourage you to use the Q&A feature to ask any questions. And without any further ado, let me welcome Ute, Diala, and Fabian to our IRENA Insights webinar series. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Karan. My name is Ute Collier. I'm the Deputy Director of the Knowledge Policy and Finance Center at IRENA, and I just want to give some short opening remarks, giving you an overview of our hydrogen work before we go into the details of the green hydrogen auctions. So in our World Energy Transitions Outlook, in the 1.5 degree scenario, we do see an important role for green hydrogen, but it's not huge. So we think hydrogen will need to meet around 14% of global final energy demand by 2050. For us, hydrogen, especially green hydrogen, has a key role for decarbonizing hard-to-abate sectors, such as heavy industry, heavy and long-haul transport, and fostering green industrial development. This clearly is an area which has received much interest from policymakers, and we've had a whole series of reports on policies for green hydrogen. The most recent one we produced was actually one on green hydrogen strategies, where we provided an overview of 50 published national hydrogen strategies and roadmaps to offer guidance for countries on how to develop their hydrogen strategies. We also recently produced a report with UNIDO and IDOS on green hydrogen for sustainable industrial development. In our view, developing countries should really prioritize the domestic use of green hydrogen to maximize the benefits of a green hydrogen economy, so that it's not just about exporting yet another product, but also to be able to use green hydrogen as a foundation for building a sustainable industrial economy. We have much wider work on green hydrogen with our colleagues in Bonn as well, spanning the entire supply chain and we're also covering critical resources like the use of water for green hydrogen. So if you have a look on our website, you will find a whole range of resources which we hope are very useful for policymakers as well as other stakeholders. In terms of today's report, the Green Hydrogen Auction Report is a significant addition to our policy work. So it builds on our expertise on auction design for renewables more broadly, but it applies it to the green hydrogen sector. So I'd now like to pass over to our auctions expert, Diala Havila, who will tell you more about the report, and I look forward to the insights from today's discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ute. So as Ute mentioned, we work a lot on the renewable energy, on green hydrogen strategy making and policies, and we still see some main barriers that are hindering the uptake of green hydrogen. So in the policy work that we do, we looked at the use of auctions for the support of green hydrogen. And we used the framework or the same approach that we have used in the past to analyze the use of auctions for renewable energy power procurement. And so with the help of our colleagues from Tetra Tech, including Fabian, who will be here today to support to also support the presentation of the report, we did this analysis whereby we go through the design elements of auctions that can be useful for green hydrogen. And we look at the positives and the pros and cons of every design element, what it can help us achieve, looking at the context of the country and its objective. So starting with the barriers that we are still facing in the green hydrogen sector, if we classify them among technological, economic, and institutional and social barriers, some of the ones that we can address using auctions include the immaturity of specific technologies, whereby auctions can be designed in a way to support the growing maturity of the technology, and for example, the reduced cost of support, which is an economic barrier. So for the moment, the high and uncertain production costs and high delivery costs and lack of suitable end uses or first movers disadvantages are barriers that can be addressed with the use of auctions. And we have, among other barriers, like institutional and social barriers. So there's a wide array of policies that we can use to help us address those barriers. Obviously, auctions are not the only ones, and auctions cannot help us address all the barriers. But if designed to do so, they can help address some of the barriers. Can we go to the next slide, please? So some of the main strengths of auctions are, some of them are related to auctions only, and some are common among various or other tariff-based schemes. So strengths that are related to tariff-based schemes in general, such as an administratively set tariff scheme like a feed-in tariff or an auction, include the long-term revenue certainty for the producers, the long-term budgetary planning for the governments, and that they support the dynamic efficiency and moving through the technology learning curve of the technology that we are addressing. However, when we go through competitively set tariffs or an auction, we get additional strengths. And those are related to the competition. Whenever we have enough competition, it can lead to true price discovery and minimize the cost of support. We can support, the auctions can enable effectiveness and transparency, and a clear pipeline of future projects that can provide a vision or clarity of the future for all the suppliers in the market. And it provides flexibility in their design. So as we will see in this presentation, auctions can be very flexible in the way we design them, and we can design them to achieve many objectives. So among the policy objectives that can be achieved through or targeted through design of the auction, we can target climate and environmental goals. We can target policy or an objective to decarbonize local industries, increase global competitiveness of certain industries. And also auctions can be designed in a way to support the system integration of variable renewable energy and electrolyzers. And they can also be designed to address the infrastructural challenges that we still face with green hydrogen, such as the transport or, for example, addressing electricity network transmission and distribution challenges. And we will see how in this presentation. Can we go to the next slide, please? But of course, auctions are also associated with some weaknesses. They are challenging in the way that, for example, if we have a lot of competition and we put a lot of pressure on the developers, we can influence the bidders making too optimistic assumptions or underbidding, which can lead to projects not being able to come online on time or to deliver as per the bid, or it can lead to cancellation of some projects, or also to some developers cutting on other costs that are important, like, for example, R&D. If there is not enough competition, we can have high prices, and then we went through an auction without reaping the benefits of the auction. And also auctions for green hydrogen, like for any other, like for renewable energy power as well, it can impose higher barriers to smaller producers. So it can favor the large producers or the large developers that have the capacity to bid, that have the capacity to run through all the feasibility studies and to qualify for auctions if we have strict requirements. Can we go to the next slide, please? And so we have analyzed different type of auctions, and I will hand over to Fabian to introduce the different types.
Thank you so much, Diala. Yeah, let's have a look at the different types of green hydrogen auctions that can address the supply side, the demand side, or both. So supply side auctions competitively allocate support to the production of green hydrogen. Typically, producers who require the least amount of support are awarded in the auction, along with other possible selection criteria. And supply side auctions aim at scaling up electrolyzer capacity and green hydrogen production for domestic use or for export. And if you go to the next slide, you will see demand side auctions. They allocate support to the consumers of green hydrogen instead. And typically, the consumers with the highest willingness to pay, but still requiring support, are awarded in the auction. Demand-side auctions encourage growing demand for green hydrogen, and they drive simultaneous ramp-up of new supply and/or imports. And if you look at the next slide, you get to a more complex setup. That's basically a so-called double-sided auction. They target both the supply and the demand side of green hydrogen. And an example often given for this is the case of the H2 Global scheme. By competitively selecting the suppliers offering green hydrogen at the lowest price and the off-takers that have the highest willingness to pay for the product, the goal here is to minimize the price difference between supply and demand. And the aim is to scale up both the supply and the demand side infrastructure simultaneously, and at the same time reduce offtake and supply risks for both sides. And finally, on the next slide, you see the concept of joint supply and demand auctions. Here, consumers and producers team up before the auction in a joint project. They require the bids to include hydrogen supply and offtake. And this type of auction therefore usually requires on-site hydrogen production and hydrogen valley consortia, which are often physically co-located and also include the transport infrastructure, often one of the biggest bottlenecks of green hydrogen projects. The bids requiring the least amount of total support are awarded. And an advantage of these joint supply and demand side auctions are that they allow for the scale up of both supply and the demand simultaneously, particularly in the case of missing transportation infrastructure. So how did we create a framework for auction design for green hydrogen? On the next slide, you can see the overview. We developed a framework for green hydrogen auction design based on IRENA's famous renewable energy design framework, auction design framework, but we really tailored it to the specifications of hydrogen technology and its ramp up. It considers how bidders can access the auction, how the auction can be conducted, and how to ensure that projects that are awarded are actually built and that they deliver as promised. In the report, which you can download, we have deep dived basically into 5 sections. An auction demand, where we define the product and what has to be done to develop a long-term pipeline of projects. Secondly, the winner selection, how to manage the competition and how to select projects. Third, requirements on location, technology, and project specifications, which really focus on how to manage the impact of green hydrogen on the overall energy system stability and the cost. Then fourth, the qualification requirements to ensure that projects are sufficiently pre-developed at the time of the auction, and therefore there's a higher certainty that they can be built afterwards. And then finally, the risk allocation between the government and the bidders, and how they impact the project costs. Overall, when you design a hydrogen auction, it's really important that you tailor it. You can take these general findings from our report, you really have to tailor it to the country, to the energy system, to the market conditions, and to the policy objectives. And you have to be aware that often there are trade-offs between achieving the lowest price and a certain set of objectives. And you have to be aware of the trade-offs and design policy mechanisms and design criteria which address these trade-offs. So on the following slides, you will see some examples of different policy decisions. And if you have this slide here, it's basically a deep dive into the topic of auction demand. And we can now look particularly at the topic of the auction product. So what in the end is being auctioned. The auction product defines the good that is to be purchased or supported through the auction. And there are basically 2 major ways to do it. One of them is to basically have the procurement or the support focused on the electrolyzer capacity installed, and the alternative is to focus on green hydrogen produced. Let's look here at the most important impacts of the policy choice. Supporting electrolyzer capacity is overall easier to implement. It provides more planning certainty for government budgets, and it reduces the production risk for the developer. However, supporting green hydrogen production instead would usually increase the likelihood that green hydrogen production and offtake is maximized. So one of the first examples of the trade-offs. If you go to the next slide, we can look at auction location specificity. So to what extent are project developers free to select a suitable site for the electrolyzer? Or to what extent will the government predetermine or maybe even pre-develop the site? And if the government does a so-called site-specific auction, that usually includes guaranteed electricity grid connection, water connection, environmental assessments, transport infrastructure, maybe also placement close to an industrial cluster, this is usually then predetermined by the government. Or alternatively, you can have a free siting of electrolyzers where the bidders can themselves decide where to place it, or you can have something in between. And overall, site-specific auctions here offer the advantage of reducing pre-development risk for the bidders. They increase the probability that awarded projects can be built, and they often, through better planning and system planning, they ensure that there's a greater system integration. But they really also, successful site-specific auctions really depend on the capacity of the government and of the auctioning authority to conduct and to finance such a pre-development. And if we go to the next slide, we can have a deep dive on the topic of winner selection. And here we're looking at the criteria. So how are bids in the end ranked? And there are 2 types of criteria which are often used, either a price-only auction, so simply the bidder with the lowest price is being awarded, or a multi-criteria auction where bids are awarded based on a multitude of different criteria. In general, price-only auctions are most effective in lowering the overall support needs and are usually easiest to implement. But multi-criteria auctions offer more ways to fine-tune the desired results, for example, on system integration, industrial development, or the socio-economic impact of the sites. But they also might need to lead to a more costly award of the project. And what you can do instead of choosing multi-criteria auctions, often you can try to target such objectives also through the pre-qualification requirements. If we go to the next slide, you can see such pre-qualification requirements. And often the key question here is, at what stage during the project development process bidders can participate in the auction? So would they participate rather early in the process? Maybe they will only have done some assessments on the site, but not so many, and they only provide light documentation, or are they already much more advanced in the project? And that's important because overall, of course, an easier pre-development requirement can lower the cost of producers, particularly the so-called sunk cost, the cost that it takes to pre-develop a bid, and therefore they can increase the competition, they lower barriers. But if they are too low, they also carry the risk of projects not being realized on time. They can be delayed, they can be not realized at all, they can be underperforming because maybe crucial permitting or price issues only surface after the award of the project. And finally, a last element we looked at is the risk allocation within the project. And I think there you can really say that the key successful auction is the allocation of risks among the different actors, project developers, off-takers, and auctioneers, and being aware also on how this in the end influences overall risk of the projects and therefore financing costs and risk profiles and bidding prices. It is important to define, for example, which trade agreements have to be secured in advance of the action or later in terms of green hydrogen, in terms of electricity, whether such agreement should be long-term or short-term, or to what extent the government provides a price guarantee. In general, we can see so far that at green hydrogen auctions, renewable energy power sourcing risk is often allocated to the green hydrogen producers, but the hydrogen offtake risk is often allocated to the government or through some intermediary, and also rarely left to private developers. And now over to Diala to finalize the presentation and talk about how to address challenges and barriers in the design.
Thank you, Fabian, for this very nice overview of the design elements. I just want to remind our listeners that if they go on the website, IRENA website, and download the report, for every category of design elements, they will see a table like the one that Fabian showed for everyone, showing first of all, defining the design elements, and then showing the trade-offs and the choice of design elements between the different policy objectives that can be achieved through the green hydrogen auctions. So, for example, if we look at the following policy objectives, some examples of them can be to achieve climate and environmental goals. In this case, technology neutral auction can be the way to go because we are looking at the lowest price for the lowest cost of support procurement of green hydrogen. So among those, to achieve those objectives, among the design elements we can look at are technology neutral auctions or winner selection criteria that are only based on price, or a ceiling price above which projects cannot be considered. However, countries that are looking to develop a green hydrogen economy, that are looking at localizing their value chains to enhance energy security or to participate in international trade of green hydrogen to diversify, for example, their energy exports, might be looking at different design elements. For example, for these objectives, we could be looking at a long-term schedule of auctions to attract investments in upstream activities. We can looking at technology-specific auctions to support specific technologies and support their development. We can be looking at winner selection criteria and qualification requirements that go beyond price, that can be aimed at localizing the value chains. Or also we can be looking at certain provisions to avoid market concentration among specific developers, to encourage more developers and more projects in the market to develop the local value chains. Some countries might be looking at attracting foreign investments in energy-intensive industries to support their international competitiveness, like, for example, green steel. So in this case, we are looking at design elements that aim for competitive prices while supporting innovation and industrial development. And you can see in the reports many design elements that can achieve that goal. Can we go to the next slide, please? So at the same time, if we go back to the barriers that we discussed at the beginning, we can design the options specifically to address those barriers. So for example, if we're looking at barriers related to the integration, to system integration of variable renewable energy, there are some design elements, for example, related to location and technology specificity, like site-specific auctions, or like guidance and incentives or requirements to guide the projects to be sited in specific zones close to grid evacuation centers. Or we could be looking at winner selection criteria that can support system integration. Other design elements can be used to address barriers related to the transport of green hydrogen. In this case, we can look at an auction demand that goes beyond procuring green hydrogen, but procuring derivatives of green products that are easier to transport and that would not require the infrastructure that would be required for green hydrogen. Or we could be looking at some design elements related to risk allocation. For example, allocating the costs and the risks associated with the transport of green hydrogen to specific entities that can bear these risks. Can we go to the next slide, please? Also, this is one very important thing to consider is that the options for green hydrogen should be designed in a way to ensure environmental and social sustainability. And they should adhere to the concept of additionality, meaning that we would not use the renewable energy for producing green hydrogen if it is needed for power. And here also there are some design elements that we can implement that can help us adhere to these criteria. Can we go to the next slide, please? Finally, it is very important to mention that auctions alone cannot achieve all of these objectives. They need to be part of a global or a wider set of policies that can be categorized according to this is IRENA's classification of policies. I will just mention one of them. The international and South-South cooperation is very important, specifically in the green hydrogen topic, because of the whole standardization and cooperation that is needed for trade and for continuing the development regarding research and development, sharing knowledge and so thank you very much for following us, and we are very happy to take some questions. Karan, if you can go to the last slide, please, where we have included the link where you can find the report. So it's on the IRENA website. If you go to irena.org and go to publications, you will find the link to the report. And if you have any questions, please feel free to write to us.
Great. Thanks, Tiala. Thanks, Ute, and thanks, Fabian, for the insightful presentation. To our audience, we encourage you to take advantage of the Q&A feature to ask any questions you have. I think we have only a couple of minutes. I will get the ball rolling while we have a few more questions, and if we have time, we can take them. We started with basically we started the presentation by saying that there are different types of auctions, about 3 to 4 types of auctions. And I was curious to know which are the most commonly used auctions that are that we see around the world, and do we see any transition to using more the different types that you mentioned?
So we have presented in the reports many case studies of countries that have already started using auctions, and we have seen the use of different types. We have not seen the use of the more frequent use of one type over others, because every country or every context is looking at specific objectives. But we focus this analysis on the supply side options. But other options that we have seen popular, for example, the H2 Global, are different types that look at supply and demand jointly. I don't know if Fabian would like to add anything to this.
No, I think that's comment. Yeah, correct. I mean, I think so far we have seen everything because the priorities of countries that are doing the auctions are so different, right? but I think there's still a tendency to go for the easiest procurement types, which is usually supply side auctions. But we see that the more and more lacking infrastructure is becoming a challenge. The more also, for example, the joint auctions where you kind of try to kind of tie hydrogen and the consuming infrastructure array together. That's often something we now see popping up in the discussions as well. But I think our main message is choose the design that you really fits your objectives most. And it is a very nascent market, so there's a lot of experimentation still going on around the world.
Yeah, thanks, Fabian. Thanks, Diala. And I think that also touches upon one of the questions we have in the Q&A feature, where where they are looking to focus on the success stories, but as you very rightly said, it's important to design the auction specific to the context, and the market is in very nascent state, so it's also very hard to comment. Unfortunately, and the objectives. Okay. So unfortunately, our time is up for today. I would like to thank Ute, Diala, and Fabian for their time and for sharing their knowledge and insights on this piece of work. I learned a lot. And I would like to thank the audience for joining us today and for their time and attention and the questions. We hope that you also learned something new. The recording and the slides of this webinar will be posted on the IRENA events page for those who missed any part of the webinar or who would like to just revisit it again. I would like to wish you a good rest of the day, and we hope to see you soon in the upcoming webinars. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care.